Welcome to my podcast, Joshua. I'm really going to enjoy talking to you about this incredibly important topic. You've written a book, Things That Matter, Overcoming Distraction to Pursue a More Meaningful Life. And we definitely are in the age of distraction. Not that distractions are anything new, but I just think we've forgotten how to manage them. So I find your book very, very pertinent, very relevant for our current age. And I am just, after you've introduced yourself, there's a couple of things I want to just read to the audience that I think are amazing. So welcome. Tell my audience a little bit more about you. They've heard your intro and bio a little bit, but it's always nice to hear from the person themselves.
Yeah, so good to be here. Thanks so much. I do think it is an important conversation about how do we live lives that we can be proud of when we get to the end of them. And by that, I mean not lives where we're going to make no mistakes, obviously, but lives where we get to the end, we have fewer regrets because we chose to pursue those things that are important and those things that actually matter. And so certainly the book is about two steps. Number one, about identifying what things matter and what things are most important. And then number two, overcoming all of the distractions that our society throws at us that often keeps us from pursuing those things in the long run. So I have a wife and two kids, and I'm here in Phoenix, Arizona, US. So it's good to be with you.
Wonderful. So great to have you with us. And I think what's really important about what you're saying is that when I was going through your book and preparing for this interview, I felt like, I know this, but are we applying this in our life? So it's really great to have this in a format where we can just draw people's attention to it. So it's really great. I wanted to read a couple of things. The first thing was a quote by Seneca on the shortness of life. I thought that's beautiful. I love this quote. One of my favorites. I want to just read it. You've got it on in your, just at your, I think it's your intro, chapter 1. We are not given a short life, but we make it short. And we are not ill-supplied, but wasteful of it. Life is long if you know how to use it. It's just profound, and it really summarizes your book. So would you talk a little bit about, why you chose that particular saying by Seneca, who's a philosopher, and how this launched you into it's literally page 1, chapter 1, and launched you into this whole book?
There were three stories that really came together in my life that kind of became the framework and the thinking behind the book. The book wasn't written for another 10 years, but I noticed an article back in 2009 by a nurse named Bronnie Ware. She was in Australia and she had worked with dying patients for years and years. And so she wrote an article called Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, based on the different conversations that she had had with so many patients over the end of their lives. And the article, what was fascinating about the article, number one, the 5 regrets are fascinating, but what was even more fascinating to me was how popular the article became. I mean, it got shared millions and millions of times. Every major media outlet in the world covered it. It was a topic that resonated with people. People were drawn to it, even as I say, top 5 regrets of the dying. Everyone wants to know what's on the list.
We're all waiting for you to tell us.
Yeah, because none of us want to reach the end of our lives with a lot of regrets. Around that same time, my grandfather, who was early 90s, perfectly healthy, he lived to be just shy of 100. He called me into his office and asked me to play a part in his funeral. Showed me what part he wanted me to play and what he wanted me to read, and asked me to say a few words. And it was a life-changing conversation because I sat across the desk from someone who not only had planned out his funeral, but didn't face death with fear, not fear of the afterlife, but not fear in that he had wasted his life. Like, he talked about the life he had lived and what he had focused on and how he had lived a life. He didn't use these words, but how he had devoted his life towards things with meaning, so much so that he could get to the end of his life and just recognize death is the next step that's going to happen. And so that Bronnie Ware article, that conversation with my grandfather, where I just began asking how do I get to that side of the desk? How do I get to the end of my life proud of how I lived? And then I ran across that Seneca quote sometime about that same time. And you stop short of the one sentence where he says, life is long enough if you know how to use it. But when life is wasted on heedless luxury and spent on no good activity, We are forced by death's final constraint to realize it passed away before we knew it was passing. And that really became the driver behind the book. What are these no good activities and what are these heedless luxuries that when we spend our lives focused upon them, life passes by before we even knew it was passing?
Wow, that's amazing. That is so fascinating. Okay, what a lovely what a lovely way to sort of birth a book and birth a concept. Your grandfather, the sort of things that he said, did they align with what that nurse said? Was there similarity? And can you just talk about those 5 regrets and link it into your grandfather's conversation, perhaps?
Yes and no. There were actually some regrets. It's in the top 5 regrets, if I can get them off the top of my head. I wish I'd stayed in touch with friends. I wish I had been more courageous to express my feelings. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I wish I had enjoyed life more. And now I forget the 5th one. Shoot, I shouldn't have tried to do them.
No problem. It's you. That's good that you remembered 4. So,
yeah, I wish I had courage to live my own life. Maybe I mentioned that one already. Those were the 5. And so certainly there were some that aligned with my grandfather, courage to live his own life. He was always loving, compassionate, and kind, and stayed in touch with people. So that was also true. But it was more of he had devoted his life to the things that were most important to him and the things that were most significant in his heart and in his soul. And he hadn't been swayed by culture, didn't take the bait so much to say as what society offers and what culture offers and says that we should be living our lives for, but didn't take the bait in that way and stayed true to things that actually matter.
That's so fantastic. I love that. That's amazing. I want to just read something from the back of your book, kind of because this so beautifully launches us into what you talk about. In the book, resisting distractions is a battle worth fighting. So we've really laid the nice foundation for that. And you say everywhere around you are distractions. We know that. The text you respond to quickly just to get it out of the way. The newest money-making side hustle to cross your mind. The evening spent organizing your overflowing kitchen cupboards. Disruptions are the enemies of a life well lived. Both the new distractions of our generation and timeless ones that have existed for centuries. They all add up to make you feel restless, tired, and unfulfilled much of the time. They keep you from living with joy, from accomplishing the good that only you can do. But that can change today. And then you basically launch into, in this book, things that matter, into the 8 distractions. So is that a good place to go now, just to maybe give people an overview of those 8 distractions and how you've laid it out in the book so it's easy for people to access the information?
Yeah, sure. I think when people hear the title, Things That Matter, Overcoming Distraction to Pursue a More Meaningful Life, their first thought is, oh, good, because I need to put my phone away more often. And certainly, as you'll mention, technology and the trivial is definitely one of the distractions that we need to fight to overcome. But it's actually the last chapter in the book. And I think when people pick up the book, they find that, hey, I'm actually wrestling with pretty deep, much deeper issues and much deeper distractions, like the distraction of past mistakes in our lives, or the distraction of money and what that can become. And so anyway, I'll leave it up to you to go through them.
No, Joshua, I think that's so good. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because as you say, it's just like it's almost overspoken, the technology. So like I didn't want to make this about another technology podcast. And that's why I'm so glad you actually referenced that, because it was kind of going to be, oh, by the way, yes, technology, because we just know. Let's talk about the deep stuff, because technology is just our current in the face thing. But there's other stuff that's timeless that you talk about, and your grandfather referenced, and what that nurse kind of, summarized. Those are way deeper things than the technology, which, is more of a, it's there, it's a problem. But when you address the other things, I think that will fall into place.
And oftentimes the technology is just a symptom of some of the other distractions that we're chasing. So go ahead, sorry.
I like that. No, that's fantastic. I love that. Okay, so in part 1, you talk about the objective and the obstacles, and you talk about, there's so much here, but I like the distracted from meaning, that grab, because we can't go through everything. So I'm going to pick out things that I know my audience is going to love. Distracted from meaning is your title, and letting the lesser crowd out the greater. Can you speak to that as a distraction?
The reality is that we only get one life, and we all have limited resources in the one life that we have. We all have limited money, we have limited time, we have limited energy, we have limited focus, we even have limited decision-making abilities. We have limited time with our kids. Like all of life has to fit within these boundaries. And what often happens is we get told from the world, from culture, society, all the things that we should be filling into this world. You should be buying the new clothes. You need to be chasing the bigger house. You need to be on this social media platform. You need to be watching this television show. You need to be reading this book. Like, you need to be involved here and involved there. And we just get constantly told all these things. And in many ways, when we add too much into our lives, or when we begin pursuing too many things with our lives, it is the most important things that get pushed out. They get pushed out first. The old illustration of putting the big rocks in the jar first before filling it with a bunch of little things, a bunch of little rocks and little sand. And so that's kind of the point that I was trying to get to. And it really lays, I think a healthy foundation for the book, that when we add too many lesser things, when we add lesser pursuits, it often distracts us from the most meaningful things.
I like that. Can you give an example from your life of how this has maybe changed and how that impacted your mental well-being?
My whole life online, or what I'm most known for writing about, is minimalism in terms of physical possessions and specifically owning less stuff. And I was introduced to minimalism 13 years ago on a Saturday morning when I was cleaning out my garage. My son was 5, and my garage cleaning project just ended up taking hours. One thing led to another, and I'm off chasing this and trying to sort this around. And I was just wanting to spring clean my garage, but it ended up taking most of the day. Meanwhile, my 5-year-old son was begging me to play with him the entire time. And I struck up a conversation with my neighbor. I was complaining a little bit about how many hours we put into cleaning out our garage, and just how the project had kind of spiraled out of control. And she said, that's why my daughter's a minimalist. She keeps telling me I don't need to own all this stuff. And I remember looking at this pile of things in my driveway, like all the things I had bought, all the things I had kept, all the things that I was cleaning and organizing. And I realized that not only were those things not making me happy, but they were actually taking me away from the very thing that did bring me happiness, as I could see my son swinging alone on the swing set in the backyard. And so it's just an example of, like, physical possessions aren't evil in and of themselves, but when we constantly chase them, when we constantly accumulate them, we can accumulate so many that they actually distract us from things of bigger meaning. So that's a pretty significant story, and an easy one for one for people to picture.
Absolutely. So did your life change from that day? Did you change around? Did you throw out your garage? Did you the stuff in your garage? Did things change in your home after that? I'm interested to know.
Yeah, absolutely. We got rid of 60-70% of our stuff, just the things that we didn't need. My daughter was 2 years old at the time, and as soon as I started removing that distraction of physical possessions, not just how many I owned, but always constantly wanting more, like that's as much of a distraction as needing to clean out our garage and clean out our basement, just always wanting to buy more and more and more. Yeah, I found, it freed up money for more important things. It resulted in less stress in my life, more time with my family. I feel like I became a better example for my kids, just even like inner well-being of more gratitude and more generosity and more contentment and less comparison. And it's pretty unbelievable what happens when we remove that distraction of possessions from our lives.
I love that. I can attest to that as well. We moved from South Africa to the States, and we had this enormous house in South Africa because my husband was in the building industry. We built our dream home, and it was just gigantic, and 4 kids, and we had so much stuff. And when we left, we just kept giving stuff away and giving stuff away. And the house never seemed to empty. It was just unbelievable. I mean, truckloads of stuff. And you sort of think, how on earth, my kids were young then, how on earth did we manage to get so much stuff? And so starting fresh in this country was, that experience that you say, that sense of peace, that sense of clarity. And so it really impacted me. That's why I was so fascinated with your, wanted to dig a little deeper and get an example, because I totally agree. It gives you a sense of peace. And now when there's clutter around me, it really, I have to get rid of it. So I don't know if you found that as well. Definitely is that physical, too much stuff around me definitely affects how I'm functioning. So I'm just interested, that's why I was asking, does that affect you as well when you see that? I know it's a physical thing and it's an external, but it has an internal effect on me. So I don't know if you found that as well.
Oh yeah. Every physical possession around us is a bit of visual distraction is how I explain it. I was reading an article one time and compared our physical surroundings a little bit to like sneaking up on a rabbit or sneaking up on a fly. And even though you're behind the rabbit somehow knows you're there.
Yeah.
Because just as animals, like they're constantly scanning their surroundings, even if you don't see them, turning their head to do that or consciously looking at everything around them, just subconsciously we're scanning. And so we do the same thing. And so just look around your room and think about how many times has that called for my attention. And it's just visual noise, I think, is the best way that I explain it. And the fewer physical things around us, the more we're able to focus and have less stress.
I love that. That's the visual noise. Then that is a nice pivot over to looking at some of the other aspects of distraction, because you talk about the physical there, but how it reflects on the internal. That very often, because people that, for example, have a hoarding issue and that kind of thing, it's always because there's some internal issue. So let's dive now a little deeper. And you have dreams overshadowed, overcoming distraction of past mistakes. Or I want to jump down to, I know that's the paralyzed will. Maybe let's briefly talk about that, the paralyzed will, and then I'd love to talk about the distraction of happiness and applause. You've kind of spoken about the possession one already. We jumped down to part 3. But let's start with the paralyzed will, and it's maybe fear and past mistakes, because that can really consume us and how that can actually become this clutter in our mind. And this podcast is very appropriate to talk about that, because this podcast is called Cleaning Up the Mental Mess. So that kind of goes to, your work goes to cleaning up the mental mess. So
yeah, there's a whole chapter on fear, which was fascinating for me to learn about. And it's true. If the most important things that we're going to accomplish in life usually require us to be brave and usually require us to be courageous. And so, not letting fear become a distraction in our lives because it can really hold back our potential. But the other chapter, and it was really by far the most heartbreaking, I think, of all we did a survey. I did a nationwide survey for the book. And when we got the survey results back, I always say the most heartbreaking result, we asked people, are there past mistakes in your life that keep you from living the life that you want today? And 60% of people said that there are mistakes in their past that keep them from living the life they want today. And 55% of people said that there was a past mistake committed against them. So not something that they did, but something that someone else or nature did to them that keeps them from living the life that they want today. And man, that's a lot of people who feel like they can't live the life they want. They're not able to live the life they want or have the future they want because of something in their past. And I mean, you would know better than I would. Like, there's no easy answers to overcoming this, but the first step for sure is to turn back and face some of those mistakes and face even some of those evils that might have been done to us, and recognize what they are and begin the process and begin the steps of overcoming them. Because man, there's so much potential in your life, and that's just so much potential in people's lives, not just for their own personal happiness, but how much they could be accomplishing for other people and how much good they could be bringing into the world if we would begin taking those steps. So yes, the distraction of regret and the distraction of past mistakes, whether we did them or someone else did them to us, is a big one.
Very interesting, because it's interesting how you've pitched them as a distraction, because people will look at those as traumas impacting how they function, and to sort of almost reconceptualize them as, yes, they are traumas and it does impact how you function, and we can reconceptualize it, but to also see them additionally as distractions to your sense of inner peace, or your sense of and as soon as you have that sense of inner peace, the most natural outflow is going to be to reach out to others and to extend kindness and compassion and empathy and that kind of thing. But when we're so caught up with distractions, those levels of empathy and compassion and distraction will drop off, won't they? I mean, this is a kind of a natural thing, because we're so caught up in that clutter, you can't see the wood for the trees.
And it becomes a spiral where because one of the key steps, I think, in overcoming that trauma is beginning to help others and beginning to serve others, and seeing that we still have worth and we still have value, and that regardless of what we've gone through, we can still play an important part in the world, and we can still help others. And the more we do that, then, the more our self-esteem grows, and the higher view we take of ourselves, and the less the trauma begins to define us. And I always think when people get to this chapter on regret and past mistakes, they're like, okay, this isn't a book just about putting down my phone. This is a book that's, really gonna cause me to rethink the way I've been living and what's maybe holding me back.
And that's why I wanted our conversation to go in this direction, because we just all know about the technologies. You had to put it in. I mean, it is a factor, but these are we've got to get these other factors, because the technology, as you said in the beginning, is very often, hey, I've got these distractions. There are these past regrets. These are these fears. These are, as you said, 60% of people, 55% of people. And I can tell you from my work too, that I totally corroborate what you're saying. This is what's it's a distraction that's holding us back. So a distraction controls us until we control it. And I think that's also what I'm reading in your book is, you may not have verbalized it like that, but it's got its claws in you. And if you can start seeing them, we see from the neuroscience that the minute we become aware of something and start not just being aware, awareness alone is not enough. You've got to go beyond awareness, and you've got to land the plane. But you start getting empowered to get control. And, you may not be able to fix everything, and you can't change the stories of the past because they've happened, but you can change how they play out into your future. So it's a really good point. That's why I wanted to go down this road. Let's talk about overcoming the distraction of happiness. And the reason I really want to talk about that, and I've mentioned this a few times, is because of our happiness culture that we live in, the compare, compete, neoliberalistic, capitalistic society, where the external, you've got to be happy and successful, and if you're not, there's something wrong with you, and the positive psychology movement. Now, I'm not knocking anything. I am just putting things in perspective. We can't just have one extreme, and we live in a very extreme kind of mindset in the last sort of 60 years. It seems to have been growing, and this is from the work I've done that I'm seeing this, and I'm interested to hear your opinion as well. That we seem to have shifted into quick fix, external, quick, fast, satisfy. Give me the 5 steps. Give me the 3 steps. Let me see how to get happy. And books about happiness and pursuing happiness they are like bestsellers, because people are desperate. So let's talk about that from your angle, which I really found fascinating.
Yeah. So the way I approach it is, and the way I like to think about it is, there are 2 pursuits that come pretty natural to us. The pursuit of self, survival at its most basic instinct, and that we're going to pursue we're going to pursue ourselves in some ways. And then there is the pursuit of happiness, which I guess is in our Declaration of Independence, right? Like it's pretty common to us. And I think it's probably pretty common to all mankind throughout all the ages. The problem, I think, becomes when we confuse the pursuit of self and the pursuit of happiness, and we think that we're going to fulfill the pursuit of happiness in the pursuit of self. In the more I get for myself, the happier I'm going to be. When in reality, almost all the positive psychology studies, like all the studies and all the research, show that people who live selfless lives are the ones who end up have the highest levels of well-being and fulfillment and peace and happiness, or however they want to define that. And so the problem isn't necessarily that that we're trying to pursue happiness. I think the problem is that we're just pursuing it in places that seem like they're going to deliver happiness, but they never actually do. And rather than thinking, okay, it's not that money isn't making me happy. It's not that, having a lot of social media followers. It's not that, having specific body image isn't bringing me happiness. It's just that I don't have enough money, or I haven't worked enough on my body, or I haven't tried the right diet, or I haven't tried the next quick fix to the different things. Rather than seeing, actually what I need to do is, once I start volunteering, once I start serving, once I become more generous, once I start giving myself to other people, that this is where I start to find real lasting happiness. And so I'm not against the pursuits, and I do put a bunch of research and a bunch of studies in that chapter that kind of prove this point. What I'm just trying to say is that we're looking for it in all the wrong places, and we're kind of selling ourselves short a little bit of where we could find real lasting happiness.
Very good. And I think that also, just to add to that, is sort of the misunderstanding perhaps, or just the misrepresentation or whatever of the quantity. So that, like, I'm a human, and in order to be successful, I should be happy all the time. Meanwhile, the research also shows that is not realistic, that moderate happiness is actually healthier because you embrace all of your emotions as a human, and that develops your character. So the sadness and the regret and the noticing the suffering of others, that's very much part of that will make you not feel happy. You read a sad story and you read something that's happened to someone, that response of responding to that is an important part of our character development. So it's almost like you don't have to be happy 100%. There's nothing wrong with being happy. It's a great part of you, but it's not 100% of the time. But we've got to be able to get I think the distraction comes in that, as you say, looking for the external validation of happiness, or the external finding of happiness, and it pursuing for a long period of time. And if I don't, there's something mentally wrong with me. If I'm not always in one of those positive states, that's where the balance comes in.
It's a pretty brand new thinking that life should be easy and life should be happy. But all of humankind mostly has been life is a struggle, and this whole thinking that it should be easy all the time can be
very modern. Yeah, you're quite right. I'm very glad you mentioned that. Okay, so let's talk about overcoming the distraction of applause, which is kind of related. Talk to us about that.
From happiness, I talk about distraction of money, then the distraction of possessions. Then I get to the distraction of accolades, praise, and applause. And it's one that I can see myself struggling with quite a bit, and even mentioned in the book that this is probably the one that trips me up more than any others. And I usually trace it back to childhood. I had a twin brother, and amazing parents and loving, stable family that loved all of us the same. But my brother was bigger and taller, and he started on the football team in high school, and I played on the JV tennis team. And so just naturally that he would get more attention at family reunions, and he was in the paper and I wasn't. And I feel like I've spent my entire life trying to like make up for that. And I want applause and accolades, and I want people to think that I'm doing really well and that I'm accomplishing a lot of things, because I don't know, I feel like I'm making up from something from when I was 14 years old still, which is interesting. But the reality is, there's nothing inherently wrong with attention and praise, and we all need it to some extent. But when we start chasing that, we start cutting corners sometimes. I think sometimes chasing applause means that we steal energy and time from things that are more meaningful and more significant. Oftentimes pursuing what's meaningful and significant leads to applause. But I mean, you can just be on any social media site and you can see people doing things just to get likes and just to get followers. And we might not all try to be social media influencers, but maybe we still do the thing to try to get noticed by our spouse or in the little communities that we're involved in, as opposed to quietly putting our head down and just doing what's important and doing the hard work and helping other people and living for others and letting the praise come as opposed to chasing it instead.
So I'm hearing you say that the chasing is the distraction, and it's that, you're paying attention to the little stones, and the big stone of just developing who you are as a person is going to naturally bring the process. And we can get so caught up that we can actually even miss the authentic applause that will naturally come at the right time, that we actually can handle, and it's more balanced and so on. So that's really important.
Yeah.
Wonderful. There's so much great wisdom.
I'll just mention,
Yes,
not only is it authentic applause, but it's more satisfying applause, because we know that we lived a life true to our values and people are noticing. That is so much more joy bringing, that helps our well-being so much more than, hey, people are liking my post, but that's not really me. Like I'm being fake just to get people to say nice things about me. Those compliments are shallow and don't amount to anything anyway, as opposed to the very authentic praise, because we stayed true to ourselves in our heart and soul and mind.
No, that's so true. I love how you said that. So just to sort of round off, you were vulnerable there and explained about your twin brother. So obviously this is something this distraction you've resolved, or you're working on, or you're resolving. I think, do we ever really fully resolve anything? We work. It's a work in progress. How has that? What have you done about that? How have you dealt with that distraction and the relationship with your twin brother and so on? I'm sure everyone's keen to hear that.
Yes. Well, number one, I just want to mention, I love how you said, kind of rephrase that about, these aren't distractions I think that we figure out and never have to deal with again. I even love the title, Overcoming Distraction to Pursue a More Meaningful Life. It's not that we eliminate these distractions and that we never have to wrestle with them, but we struggle with these every single day, probably. And I think that's the journey of life, is to identify what's important, identify what's distracting us from it, and then it's worth the battle to overcome those distractions for things that matter. Yeah, my brother and I have always had a fine and good relationship, and it's always been, I think, more a me issue than anything that anyone did wrong or did incorrectly. Have I resolved it? I hope so. Number one, I think just certainly being aware of it can help, but it's not all that needs to take place. And I think that when you decide that you're going to find your fulfillment and you're going to find your joy and you're going to find your meaning in living your best life, living up to your potential, focused on the things that matter to you, I think this is how we begin to overcome any and all of these distractions, including this one.
No, that's excellent. I love how you said that. And I think it's so important, because what you're talking about is mind management, which is something I talk about all the time in my work, and just cleaning up one's mental mess is an ongoing process. It's kind of, hey, it's okay to be a mess. The fact that you can talk about this, the fact that you can share this on a podcast that thousands of people are going to hear, and you've obviously spoken about this to your brother, you're obviously managing it. So the awareness led to a management, and it's a process, and that in itself is authentic and is a way of managing the distractions. So I really, really like that you used that example, and thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing your wisdom today and encouraging us to take a more minimalistic and less distracted approach to life. So it's really fantastic. So how can people get hold of you and find out more about you and get your book?
The book is Things That Matter, Overcoming Distraction to Pursue a More Meaningful Life, and it can be found anywhere and everywhere. And my home base online, my website is becomingminimalist.com. I do a lot of different things online, but that's always the best place to find me and what I'm working on. So Thank you so much for this. Appreciate it. Appreciate all the work you do.
Thank you so much. Well, it's been a great discussion. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for being with me today.
Wonderful.